The morning sun painted Chicago's O'Hare International Airport in streaks of gold and amber as Dr. Maya Thompson adjusted her laptop bag and checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Terminal 3 hummed with the familiar symphony of rolling luggage, gate announcements, and the distant whir of jet engines that had become the soundtrack to her life over the past 18 months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had earned every frequent flyer mile the hard way. As one of the youngest Federal Aviation Administration safety inspectors in the agency's history, she spent more time above the clouds than on solid ground, investigating mechanical failures, reviewing safety protocols, and ensuring that the millions of passengers who entrusted their lives to commercial aviation could do so with confidence. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen what could go wrong at 30,000 feet and dedicated her career to making sure it didn't. But today was different. Today, Maya wasn't traveling for work. She was heading home to Atlanta with her 12-year-old daughter Zoe for the first real vacation they'd managed to take together in over 2 years. Zoe bounced on her toes beside her mother, clutching a worn purple backpack decorated with patches from every state they'd visited together. The bag was her prized possession, a visual diary of their adventures across the country. Each patch told a story: the Grand Canyon from last summer, Yellowstone from the spring before, the Space Center from Houston where Zoe had declared she wanted to become an astronaut-engineer hybrid that would fix spaceships and fly them too. "Mom, do you think they'll have those warm cookies on this flight?" Zoe asked, her dark eyes bright with excitement. She had inherited Maya's curious nature and analytical mind, but where Maya had learned to temper her enthusiasm with professional caution, Zoe still approached the world with unbridled wonder. Maya smiled, running her fingers through her daughter's carefully braided hair. "We're flying first class today, baby. They'll have whatever you want." The first-class tickets had been Maya's one indulgence, purchased with bonus pay from a particularly complex investigation she'd completed 6 months earlier. A cargo plane had experienced catastrophic engine failure over the Midwest, and Maya's analysis of the maintenance records had uncovered a pattern of ignored safety warnings that could have led to passenger fatalities if left unaddressed. The airline had quietly implemented new protocols. The manufacturer had issued safety bulletins, and Maya had received a commendation that came with enough extra pay to afford something special. She'd chosen these tickets not for the luxury, but for the uninterrupted time with Zoe. No middle seats, no cranky passengers, no flight delays that would eat into their precious week together. Just mother and daughter, finally able to relax after Maya's grueling schedule of investigations that had taken her from Seattle to Miami, from Denver to Boston, often with less than 12 hours at home between assignments. The past 2 years had been particularly intense. Maya's expertise in avionics systems had made her invaluable during a period when the industry was grappling with new technology integration and aging infrastructure. She'd investigated everything from hydraulic failures to software glitches, from pilot error to mechanical sabotage. Each case required meticulous attention to detail, comprehensive reports, and follow-up inspections that could take weeks to complete. Zoe had been patient, staying with Maya's sister Carmen during the longer trips, FaceTiming from airport lounges and hotel rooms, accepting that her mother's work quite literally kept people safe in the sky. But Maya knew the cost of her dedication. She'd missed school plays and soccer games, birthday parties and sleepovers. This vacation was her attempt to balance the scales, to show Zoe that she was the most important thing in Maya's world, even when duty called her away. They approached the boarding gate for Skyline Airways Flight 892, a direct route to Atlanta that would get them to their hotel by early afternoon. Maya had specifically chosen Skyline for this trip, not because of any particular loyalty, but because her professional experience had shown them to be generally reliable. Their safety record was solid, their maintenance protocols thorough, and their customer service reputation better than most. Zoe pressed her face against the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the ground crew prepare their aircraft. "Look, Mom, they're loading the luggage. Think they'll be careful with our bags?" "They'd better be," Maya said, squeezing Zoe's shoulder, "especially with all those patches of yours." The backpack was more than just luggage to Zoe. It represented every moment they'd managed to steal together between Maya's work obligations. The patches weren't just souvenirs. They were proof that despite the demands of Maya's career, they'd found ways to explore the country together. Maya had made it a tradition to let Zoe choose one patch from every trip. Whether it was a quick weekend getaway to national parks or longer adventures during Maya's rare stretches of time off. Inside the bag, Zoe carried her travel journal, a thick notebook where she documented their adventures with the precision of a future scientist. She wrote detailed observations about cloud formations at different altitudes, sketched the landscapes they flew over, and recorded conversations with pilots who were always delighted to meet the daughter of an FAA inspector. Maya had encouraged this habit, knowing that Zoe's analytical nature and love of aviation might one day lead her down a similar career path. But it wasn't just the professional connection that made their travel special. These trips were where Maya felt most like herself, not as an inspector or an expert witness or a government official, but simply as Zoe's mother. Away from the pressure of investigations and the weight of responsibility for public safety, she could focus entirely on her daughter's excitement about trying new foods, seeing new places, and learning about the world beyond their small Atlanta neighborhood. Ecole, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the FAA. She glanced at it quickly, a brief update about a routine inspection scheduled for the following week, then put the device away. For the next 7 days, she was officially off duty. No emergency calls, no urgent reviews, no quick questions that would inevitably consume hours of her vacation time. Zoe had noticed her mother's improved mood over the past few days as the trip approached. Maya had been more present during their evening dinners, less distracted during their weekend errands, and more willing to engage in the elaborate storytelling games that Zoe loved. They'd spent the previous evening planning their itinerary, the Georgia Aquarium, a Braves game, hiking trails in the North Georgia mountains, and a visit to the Center for Civil and Human Rights that Maya had been promising to take Zoe to for months. First-class passengers were now ready to begin boarding, announced the gate agent, her voice crisp and professional through the intercom. Maya checked their boarding passes one final time. Seats 2A and 2B, right behind the bulkhead, where Zoe would have extra room to stretch her legs and spread out her travel activities. Maya had specifically requested the window seat for her daughter, knowing how much Zoe loved watching the world shrink below them during takeoff. They joined the small line of first-class passengers, a mix of business travelers in expensive suits and families like theirs who had splurged for special occasions. Maya noticed a few people glancing at them, and she felt the familiar twinge of awareness that came with being black in spaces where their presence was sometimes questioned. But she pushed the feeling aside. She belonged here. Her work protecting aviation safety earned her the right to enjoy its benefits, and her daughter deserved to experience the comfort and service that Maya's expertise had helped make possible. Zoe clutched her backpack tighter as they approached the jet bridge, her excitement palpable. This was their first time flying first class together, and Maya could see her daughter taking in every detail: the priority boarding announcement, the polite treatment from gate staff, the envious glances from other passengers still waiting in the general boarding area. "Remember what I taught you about air pressure during takeoff?" Maya asked as they walked down the jet bridge. "Chew gum or yawn to pop your ears," Zoe recited dutifully. "And the slight discomfort is just your body adjusting to the change in altitude as we climb." Maya smiled. Even on vacation, she couldn't help but turn every experience into a learning opportunity. But Zoe didn't mind. She absorbed information like a sponge, and Maya often found herself amazed by her daughter's ability to understand complex concepts that most adults struggled with. The aircraft was a newer model, one that Maya had inspected during its certification process 2 years earlier. She recognized the interior layout, the upgraded safety features, the improved passenger amenities that made modern air travel more comfortable than ever. Everything about this flight was designed to be perfect. The timing that would get them to Atlanta with their whole afternoon free, the aircraft model that offered superior comfort, the airline's reputation for reliability. As they stepped into the cabin, Maya felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with aviation safety or professional duty. For the first time in months, she was just a mother taking her daughter on a special trip, ready to create memories that would last long after Zoe's backpack ran out of room for new patches. The flight attendants were busy with their pre-flight preparations, organizing service items and reviewing passenger lists. Maya nodded politely to the crew as she guided Zoe toward their seats, feeling the familiar comfort of being inside an aircraft, but without the weight of professional scrutiny that usually accompanied her travels. Zoe settled into her window seat with practiced ease, immediately pulling out her journal and colored pencils to document this new adventure. She positioned her backpack carefully on the floor beside her feet, patting it affectionately as if reassuring herself that all her treasured patches were safe. Maya took the aisle seat, already feeling more relaxed than she had in weeks. The next few hours would be simple: a peaceful flight to Atlanta, followed by a week of undivided attention for her daughter. No investigations, no reports, no emergency calls that would pull her away from the vacation they'd both been planning for months. As other passengers boarded and found their seats, Maya closed her eyes briefly and allowed herself to imagine the week ahead. She pictured Zoe's face lighting up at the aquarium, her excitement during the baseball game, her curiosity during their museum visits. These were the moments that made all the travel and pressure of Maya's career worthwhile, the chance to show her daughter the world and share her passion for learning and exploration. The boarding process continued around them, a familiar ballet of passengers stowing luggage and settling into seats. Maya opened her eyes and watched Zoe carefully arranging her travel supplies, organizing her journal and pencils with the same methodical precision that Maya brought to her professional investigations. In just a few minutes they would be airborne, beginning a vacation that represented months of planning and anticipation. Maya felt a deep sense of contentment as she prepared for takeoff, unaware that in less than 10 minutes, everything would change in ways that would ripple far beyond their small section of the aircraft. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The cabin filled with the subtle energy of departure preparations. As passengers settled into their seats, Maya watched Zoe arrange her colored pencils in perfect rainbow order across her tray table, each movement deliberate and careful. The purple backpack sat securely between Zoe's feet, its collection of patches catching the morning light streaming through the aircraft windows. "Welcome aboard Skyline Airways Flight 892, with non-stop service to Atlanta," came the cheerful announcement from the cockpit. "We're expecting a smooth flight today with clear skies and a tailwind that should get us there 15 minutes ahead of schedule." Maya felt herself truly relax for the first time in months. The familiar sounds of pre-flight preparation, overhead bins closing, seatbelts clicking, quiet conversations between passengers created a soundtrack of normalcy that she found deeply comforting. This was going to be perfect. Flight attendant Rebecca Walsh moved through the first-class cabin with practiced efficiency, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her Navy uniform crisp and professional. She'd been flying for Skyline Airways for 8 years, long enough to develop strong opinions about passenger behavior and cabin management. As she approached the Thompson seats, her eyes immediately fixed on the backpack positioned on the floor. "Excuse me," Rebecca said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the ambient cabin noise. "That bag needs to be stowed in the overhead compartment." Maya looked up from her magazine, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry?" "The backpack," Rebecca repeated, pointing directly at Zoe's purple bag. "Floor storage is not permitted during taxi and takeoff. It's a safety violation." Zoe glanced up from her journal, her pencil hovering over a half-finished sketch of clouds. "But it fits under the seat," she said quietly. "We always put it there." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Not on my aircraft. Safety regulations require all personal items to be properly stowed. The bag goes in the overhead bin." Maya felt a flicker of annoyance but kept her voice level. "The bag is completely under the seat and not blocking any aisle. I'm familiar with FAA regulations, and this positioning is perfectly compliant." The mention of FAA regulations seemed to trigger something in Rebecca's demeanor. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she stepped closer to their row. "Ma'am, I don't care what you think you know about regulations. I'm responsible for safety in this cabin, and I'm telling you that bag needs to be moved." Other first-class passengers had begun to notice the interaction. A businessman in 1A glanced over his newspaper with mild curiosity. A woman across the aisle paused her phone conversation to listen. The cabin, which moments before had hummed with pleasant pre-flight chatter, grew noticeably quieter. Zoe looked up at her mother with wide eyes, confusion clear on her face. "Mom, did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Maya said gently, then addressed Rebecca directly. "Look, I understand you have procedures to follow, but the bag is secured and positioned exactly where carry-on items are supposed to be during taxi and takeoff. There's no safety issue here. Rebecca's voice rose slightly, enough that passengers several rows back could hear clearly. "Ma'am, I need you to stop arguing with me and follow instructions. This is not a negotiation." Maya felt heat rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Years of dealing with difficult situations in her professional life had taught her the value of de-escalation. "I'm not arguing. I'm simply explaining that we're in compliance with safety regulations." "You're in compliance when I say you're in compliance," Rebecca snapped back. "And right now you're not." The exchange was beginning to attract attention from beyond first class. Passengers in the forward rows of economy could see into the premium cabin, and several had turned to watch the developing confrontation. A few were already reaching for their phones, though none had begun recording yet. Zoe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clutching her journal tighter. "Mom, should I move my backpack?" Before Maya could respond, Rebecca reached down and grabbed the purple backpack by its top handle. "I'll take care of this myself." "Wait!" Maya started, but Rebecca was already lifting the bag. What happened next occurred in slow motion, yet felt shockingly sudden. Whether intentionally or through careless handling, Rebecca's grip on the backpack loosened as she lifted it. The bag slipped from her hand and hit the floor of the aisle with a heavy thud. The sound of Zoe's colored pencils scattering across the floor mixed with the metallic clink of the bag's zipper coming partially undone. But Rebecca wasn't finished. In what appeared to be frustration at dropping the bag, she kicked it sharply with her foot, sending it sliding several feet down the aisle. Patches that had been carefully sewn on over months of travel scattered across the floor. Zoe's journal fell open, pages fluttering as other passengers' feet unconsciously stepped around the debris. The cabin fell completely silent. Zoe's gasp was audible to everyone in first class. She stared at her beloved backpack, now crumpled against the galley wall, its contents spilled across the aisle like roadkill. The Grand Canyon patch lay near a businessman's shoe. The Yellowstone patch had somehow ended up under the seat across the aisle. Her carefully organized pencils were everywhere, some broken, their colorful fragments creating a sad rainbow across the dark carpet. "My patches," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible. Tears began forming in her eyes as she unbuckled her seatbelt and started to get up. "Stay in your seat," Rebecca commanded, her voice now loud enough for the entire forward section of the aircraft to hear clearly. "We're preparing for departure." Maya's professional composure cracked completely. She stood up so quickly that her own seatbelt alarm chimed. "What is wrong with you?" "That's a child's belongings you just destroyed." "I didn't destroy anything," Rebecca replied coldly. "I was ensuring compliance with safety regulations. If the bag had been properly stowed in the first place, this wouldn't have happened." The woman across the aisle finally spoke up. "I saw what happened. You threw that little girl's bag." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Rebecca whirled around. "Ma'am, I need you to mind your own business and prepare for departure." "I am preparing for departure," the woman replied evenly. "But I'm also witnessing what appears to be completely unprofessional behavior toward a child." More passengers were now openly watching the confrontation. The businessman in 1A had lowered his newspaper completely. Several people in economy had their phones out, though the angle made it difficult to capture clear footage of what was happening in first class. Zoe was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face as she stared at her scattered belongings. "Those patches took us 2 years to collect," she said to no one in particular. "Some of them are ruined." Maya knelt in the aisle, beginning to gather Zoe's things. The Grand Canyon patch had a footprint on it. Several colored pencils were snapped in half. Zoe's journal had pages that were wrinkled and torn. As Maya collected each item, her anger grew hotter and more focused. "You need to return to your seat immediately," Rebecca said, standing directly over Maya. "We are preparing for pushback." Maya looked up from the floor, her voice deadly quiet. "You just assaulted a child's personal property, and now you're ordering me around like I'm some kind of criminal." "I didn't assault anything. I was doing my job." "Your job is to ensure passenger safety and comfort, not to terrorize 12-year-old girls." The tension in the cabin had become thick enough to cut. Other passengers were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of what was clearly escalating beyond a simple disagreement about bag placement. Rebecca's face flushed red. "Ma'am, if you don't return to your seat and stop disrupting this flight, I'm going to have to ask you to deplane." The word hung in the air like a threat. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach, not fear, but recognition. She'd seen this before, in her professional life, in news stories, in the experiences of friends and colleagues. This wasn't about safety regulations or bag placement, or even about Rebecca's authority. This was about power, and about who belonged in first class, and about what happened when someone like Rebecca decided that people like Maya and Zoe were occupying space they hadn't earned. "You want us to get off the plane," Maya said slowly, "because I questioned your decision to destroy my daughter's belongings. I want you to get off the plane because you're being disruptive and non-compliant with crew instructions." Zoe looked up from her tears, her young voice cutting through the tension. "Mommy, are we in trouble? Did I do something wrong with my backpack?" The question hit every passenger within earshot like a physical blow. Here was a 12-year-old girl, asking if she had somehow caused this confrontation by the simple act of having a backpack full of travel memories. Maya felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This wasn't just about a flight anymore. This was about her daughter, learning whether the world was a place where she belonged, or a place where she would be perpetually questioned, challenged, and diminished. She stood up slowly, Zoe's damaged belongings in her hands, and looked Rebecca directly in the eye. "Let me be very clear about something. I am a Federal Aviation Administration safety inspector. I have investigated aircraft incidents across this country for the past decade. I know FAA regulations better than you do, and nothing about our bag placement violated any safety protocol." Rebecca's confidence wavered slightly, but she pressed forward. "I don't care what your job is. Right now, you're a passenger on my aircraft and you're being disruptive." "What's disruptive?" Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin, "is a flight attendant who thinks she can assault a child's property and then threaten to remove passengers who question her behavior." The cabin had become a theater, with every passenger now openly watching the confrontation. Several phones were recording from economy class, though the first-class curtain obscured some of the view. The woman across the aisle had her phone out as well, positioned to capture Rebecca's face as she responded to Maya's accusations. "I'm calling the captain," Rebecca announced, reaching for the interphone. "You do that," Maya replied. "I'd like to speak with him myself." As Rebecca spoke quietly into the interphone, Maya knelt down again to comfort Zoe. "It's gonna be okay, baby. None of this is your fault." "But my patches are ruined," Zoe whispered. "The Grand Canyon one has a footprint on it, and the Yellowstone one is all bent." Maya felt tears threatening her own eyes as she looked at the damage. These weren't just patches to Zoe, they were memories. Evidence of the precious time they'd managed to spend together, despite Maya's demanding career. Physical reminders of every adventure they'd shared, now scattered and damaged by someone who saw them as problems to be solved rather than people to be served. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a slight delay while we resolve a cabin issue. We apologize for any inconvenience." Rebecca returned, flanked now by a male flight attendant who looked uncomfortable with whatever role he'd been asked to play. "The captain would like to speak with you at the front of the aircraft," she announced. Maya helped Zoe gather the last of her belongings, some too damaged to salvage. As they walked toward the front of the plane, every eye in first class followed them. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Zoe's quiet sniffles and the crinkle of damaged journal pages. At the galley, Captain James Morrison waited, his expression serious but not unkind. He was a veteran pilot, someone Maya recognized by reputation if not personally. "Dr. Thompson," he said quietly, "I understand there's been some confusion about carry-on placement." Maya looked at him directly. "Captain Morrison, there's been no confusion about regulations. There's been a deliberate escalation of a non-existent safety issue, followed by the destruction of my daughter's personal property, followed by threats of removal when I questioned the behavior." The captain glanced at Rebecca, then back at Maya. "I'm told you were non-compliant with crew instructions." "I was non-compliant with instructions that had no basis in actual safety regulations," Maya replied. "And when I pointed that out, your flight attendant kicked my daughter's backpack down the aisle, destroying belongings that represent 2 years of our travels together." Zoe held up the damaged Grand Canyon patch, her voice small but clear. "This was from when we went hiking together. It's the first patch I ever got." Captain Morrison looked at the damaged patch, then at Zoe's tear-stained face, then at the scattered debris still visible in the aisle. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and Maya recognized the moment when a professional realized they were looking at something that couldn't be explained away or justified. "Dr. Thompson," he said finally, "I think we need to talk." Captain James Morrison studied Maya's face for a long moment, his experienced pilot's eyes taking in details that most people would miss. The controlled anger in her posture, the protective way she kept one hand on Zoe's shoulder, the professional composure that was clearly costing her significant effort to maintain. But most importantly, he recognized something else. Competence. Authority. The bearing of someone who belonged in cockpits and control towers. Not someone who could be dismissed or intimidated. "Dr. Thompson," he said quietly, "why don't we step into the forward galley where we can speak privately?" Rebecca started to follow, but Morrison held up a hand. "Ms. Walsh, please return to your duties. I'll handle this from here." The galley was cramped, barely large enough for 3 people, but it offered a semblance of privacy from the watching passengers. Zoe clutched her damaged journal against her chest, occasionally glancing back toward their seats, where her scattered belongings still lay in the aisle. Morrison closed the galley curtain and turned to face them. "I need to understand exactly what happened here, because what I'm seeing doesn't match what I was told over the interphone." Maya took a deep breath, her years of writing incident reports helping her organize her thoughts with clinical precision. "Captain, at approximately 8:47 a.m., your flight attendant Ms. Walsh approached our seats and demanded that my daughter's backpack be moved from its position under the seat to the overhead compartment. When I explained that the bag was properly positioned according to FAA carry-on regulations, she became increasingly aggressive." "The bag was blocking the aisle," Rebecca interjected from behind the curtain. "Ms. Walsh," Morrison said without turning around, "I asked you to return to your duties." Maya continued. "When I mentioned my familiarity with FAA regulations, Ms. Walsh became hostile and grabbed my daughter's backpack without permission. She then dropped it, and when the contents began to spill, she deliberately kicked the bag down the aisle, destroying several items that have significant sentimental value to my daughter." Morrison looked down at Zoe, who was carefully smoothing out a wrinkled page of her travel journal. "Is that what happened, sweetheart?" Zoe nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said my backpack was bad, but it was in the same place where Mommy always puts it. Then she grabbed it and it fell, and she kicked it really hard. My Grand Canyon patch got stepped on." The captain knelt down to Zoe's eye level. "Can you show me the patch that got damaged?" Zoe opened her small hand to reveal the Grand Canyon patch, now bearing a clear footprint across the colorful canyon image. The fabric was torn slightly where someone's shoe had pressed into it. Morrison stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Thompson, you mentioned your familiarity with FAA regulations. What's your background?" "I'm a Federal Aviation Administration safety inspector," Maya replied. "I've been with the agency for 11 years, specializing in commercial aircraft safety protocols and incident investigation." The captain's eyebrows rose slightly. "Safety inspector? Which field office?" "I'm based out of Chicago, but I cover the entire Midwest region. I report to Regional Administrator Patricia Chen." Morrison's demeanor shifted perceptibly. Patricia Chen was not a name that got thrown around casually in aviation circles. She was one of the most respected administrators in the FAA, known for her uncompromising stance on safety and her direct line to the top levels of federal aviation oversight. "Dr. Thompson," Morrison said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer as a professional, not as a passenger. In your expert opinion, was there any legitimate safety concern with your daughter's bag placement?" Maya met his gaze directly. "None whatsoever. The bag was completely under the seat, secured against the seat back, not protruding into the aisle or blocking any emergency egress route. The positioning was textbook compliant with 14 CFR 121.589. Morrison nodded slowly. He knew Regulation 14 CFR 121.589 by heart. Every commercial pilot did. It governed carry-on baggage placement during taxi, takeoff, and landing. Maya had just cited it, with the precision of someone who had not only read it, but had likely written reports based on violations of it. "Captain," Maya continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when briefing airline executives after safety incidents, "I need you to understand that this isn't just about a damaged backpack or hurt feelings. What I witnessed today was a complete fabrication of a safety violation, followed by the destruction of passenger property, followed by threats of removal when the passenger questioned the crew's actions. This represents a failure of training, supervision, and basic professional conduct." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. As captain, he had absolute authority over his aircraft and everyone on it, but he also had responsibilities to his passengers, to his employer, and to the federal regulations that governed commercial aviation. Standing before him was not just an upset passenger, but a federal inspector who could potentially ground his aircraft with a single phone call. "Dr. Thompson," he said finally, "what outcome are you looking for here?" Maya looked down at Zoe, who was still trying to salvage pages of her travel journal. Several entries were completely ruined, their careful handwriting smeared beyond recognition. "I want an acknowledgement that what happened here was wrong. I want an apology to my daughter for the destruction of her property. And I want assurance that Ms. Walsh will receive additional training on both FAA regulations and appropriate passenger interaction." "That seems reasonable," Morrison began, but Maya held up her hand. "I'm not finished," she said, her voice hardening. "I also want to know how often this kind of incident occurs on Skyline Airways flights. And I want to know what protocols you have in place to prevent crew members from targeting passengers based on their own biases, rather than actual safety concerns." The questions hit Morrison like a punch to the gut. Maya wasn't just asking for an apology and some retraining. She was asking the kinds of questions that federal investigators asked when they suspected systemic problems, the kinds of questions that led to comprehensive audits, regulatory scrutiny, and potential sanctions. "Dr. Thompson," Morrison said slowly, "are you speaking as a passenger or as an FAA inspector?" Maya considered the question carefully. Until this moment, she had been thinking of herself as a mother whose daughter had been mistreated. But Morrison's question forced her to confront a larger reality. She was a federal aviation safety inspector who had just witnessed what appeared to be a deliberate fabrication of safety violations by airline crew. She couldn't simply ignore that and pretend it was just a customer service issue. "Captain," she said finally, "right now I'm speaking as a passenger who happens to be a federal inspector. But depending on how this situation is resolved, that could change very quickly." The implicit threat was clear. Maya had the authority to initiate a formal investigation into crew conduct, passenger treatment protocols, and training adequacy. Such an investigation could potentially ground aircraft, suspend crew members, and trigger federal oversight that could cost Skyline Airways millions of dollars. Morrison reached for his phone. "Dr. Thompson, I'm going to call our chief of operations. This situation requires involvement from management levels above my authority." "Before you make that call," Maya said, "I want you to know that I'm going to be documenting everything that happens from this point forward. Every conversation, every decision, every outcome. If this becomes an official investigation, everything that transpires here will be part of the record." The captain paused with his phone halfway to his ear. "Are you recording this conversation?" "I don't need to record it," Maya replied. "I'm trained to remember conversations with perfect accuracy for investigative purposes. It's part of my job." Morrison completed his call, speaking quietly into the phone for several minutes. Maya could hear only fragments. "Federal inspector, passenger incident, need guidance immediately." While they waited, Maya knelt down beside Zoe and helped her continue organizing her damaged belongings. The Yellowstone patch could probably be repaired with careful stitching. The Space Center patch was intact but dirty, but several items were clearly beyond salvation. "Mommy," Zoe whispered, "are we going to miss our vacation?" "I don't know yet, baby," Maya replied honestly. "But whatever happens, we're going to make sure this was worth it." Morrison ended his call and turned back to them. "Dr. Thompson, our Chief of Operations, Michael Rodriguez, is driving to the airport right now. He should be here within 20 minutes. He's asked me to delay departure until he can speak with you personally. And Ms. Walsh? Ms. Walsh has been relieved of duty for this flight. She's been asked to report to crew scheduling for immediate consultation with management." Maya nodded, but her expression remained serious. Captain, I appreciate the quick response, but I need you to understand that this goes beyond just one flight attendant. The fact that Ms. Walsh felt comfortable fabricating safety violations and destroying passenger property suggests a larger problem with training, oversight, or company culture. What do you mean? I mean that in my experience, when crew members behave this way, it's usually because they believe they can get away with it, either because it's happened before without consequences, or because they've been trained to prioritize authority over accuracy, or because the company culture tolerates discrimination as long as it doesn't generate complaints. Morrison looked uncomfortable. Dr. Thompson, I can't speak to company-wide policies or training programs. That's above my level. I understand, Maya replied, but Mr. Rodriguez can speak to those things. And he's going to need to, because I'm going to ask him some very specific questions about Skyline Airways passenger treatment protocols, crew training standards, and incident reporting procedures. The captain's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it quickly, then looked up. Mr. Rodriguez is in the building. He'll be here in 5 minutes. Maya stood up and helped Zoe gather her belongings. Zoe, we're going to go talk to some people about what happened to your backpack. I want you to tell them exactly what you saw, okay? Don't worry about getting anyone in trouble. Just tell the truth. Zoe nodded solemnly. Will they be able to fix my patches? I don't know, sweetheart, but they're going to try to make things right. As they waited for Rodriguez to arrive, Maya felt her mindset completing its transformation. She was no longer just a passenger seeking resolution to a customer service problem. She was a federal inspector who had witnessed potential violations of passenger rights, safety protocols, and professional conduct standards. The mother in her wanted justice for Zoe's tears and damaged memories. But the inspector wanted answers about how an airline crew member could feel comfortable destroying a child's property and threatening removal for questioning that destruction. Morrison's radio crackled to life. Captain Morrison, this is operations. Mr. Rodriguez is at the gate and requesting permission to board. Permission granted, Morrison replied. Send him directly to the forward galley. Maya took Zoe's hand as they heard footsteps approaching on the jet bridge. Remember, baby, just tell the truth about what you saw. I will, Mommy, Zoe replied, but I still don't understand why that lady was so mean to us. Maya looked down at her daughter's innocent face and felt something harden inside her chest. Zoe shouldn't have to understand why someone would target her because of her race. But she was about to learn that sometimes the world was unfair in ways that had nothing to do with safety regulations or proper procedures, and everything to do with people who couldn't imagine that a black child belonged in first class. The footsteps were getting closer now, and Maya knew that the next few minutes would determine whether this incident became a private resolution or a public reckoning. She was prepared for either outcome, but she knew which one would better serve the thousands of other passengers who might face similar treatment in the future. Michael Rodriguez appeared at the galley entrance, slightly out of breath and clearly stressed. He was a tall man in his 40s, impeccably dressed, despite having rushed to the airport. His expression was serious but not defensive, which Maya took as a positive sign. Dr. Thompson, he said, extending his hand. I'm Michael Rodriguez, Chief of Operations for Skyline Airways. I understand we have a very serious situation here. Maya shook his hand firmly. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for coming so quickly. We do indeed have a serious situation, and I'm hoping we can resolve it in a way that ensures it never happens again. Rodriguez looked down at Zoe, taking in her tear-stained face and the damaged belongings in her hands. And you must be Zoe. I'm very sorry about what happened to your things. Zoe looked up at him with the directness that only children possess. Are you going to fire the mean lady who kicked my backpack? Rodriguez glanced at Maya, then back at Zoe. We're going to make sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to any other little girls or boys. That's a promise. Maya studied Rodriguez's face carefully, looking for signs of sincerity versus corporate damage control. What she saw gave her hope that this conversation might actually lead somewhere productive. Mr. Rodriguez, she said, I think we need to have a very frank discussion about what happened here and what it means for your airline's operations going forward. Michael Rodriguez stepped fully into the galley area, his presence immediately commanding attention from the small crowd that had gathered. Behind him, Maya could see additional airline personnel boarding the aircraft, people in suits who clearly weren't part of the regular flight crew. The situation had escalated beyond a simple passenger complaint into what appeared to be a full corporate crisis response. "Dr. Thompson," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly how precarious his company's position had become. "Before we discuss anything else, I want you to know that I've already initiated a comprehensive review of this incident. Ms. Walsh has been suspended pending a full investigation, and we're treating this as a potential violation of federal passenger protection regulations." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Potential violation? Dr. Thompson, I've been briefed on your background and your authority within the FAA. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending this was anything other than a clear breach of professional conduct standards. The question now is how we move forward in a way that serves justice and prevents future incidents." Captain Morrison shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Mr. Rodriguez, the passengers are getting restless. We've been delayed for over 30 minutes now." "The passengers can wait," Rodriguez replied firmly. "Dr. Thompson, I'd like to propose something unprecedented. Rather than handling this through our normal customer service channels, I want to address this publicly, on this aircraft, in front of the passengers who witnessed what happened to your daughter." Maya studied Rodriguez's face carefully. In her years as a federal inspector, she'd learned to read corporate executives during crisis situations. Some tried to minimize damage. Others attempted to shift blame. A few, like Rodriguez appeared to be doing, recognized that transparency was their only path to credibility. "What exactly are you proposing?" Maya asked. "I want to make a public announcement to the entire aircraft about what happened, acknowledge that Ms. Walsh's behavior was unacceptable, and ensure that every passenger understands that Skyline Airways does not tolerate discrimination or abuse of authority by our crew members." Zoe looked up from her damage journal. "Will you tell everyone that I didn't do anything wrong?" Rodriguez knelt down to Zoe's eye level, his expression genuinely remorseful. "Zoe, you didn't do anything wrong at all. What happened to you and your backpack was completely unfair, and I want everyone on this plane to know that." Maya felt a flicker of hope that this situation might actually result in meaningful accountability rather than the usual corporate damage control. "Mr. Rodriguez, if you're serious about public transparency, then I have some conditions." "I'm listening." "First, I want a full explanation of what specific policies or training failures allowed this incident to occur. Second, I want concrete steps outlined for preventing similar incidents in the future. And third, I want a commitment that this announcement will be recorded and made available to media outlets and civil rights organizations." Rodriguez took a deep breath. "Dr. Thompson, you're asking me to potentially expose our company to significant legal and financial liability. Mr. Rodriguez, your flight attendant potentially violated federal civil rights laws when she targeted my daughter based on racial bias rather than legitimate safety concerns. Your exposure to liability already exists. I'm offering you a chance to get ahead of it through honest accountability rather than reactive damage control." One of the suited executives who had boarded with Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Rodriguez, I strongly advise against making any public statements that could be construed as admissions of liability." Maya turned to face the executive directly. "And you are?" "David Chen, General Counsel for Skyline Airways." "Mr. Chen, I'm Dr. Maya Thompson, Federal Aviation Administration's Safety Inspector. Are you advising your client to cover up a potential civil rights violation involving a 12-year-old child?" Chen's face paled slightly. "Dr. Thompson, I'm simply advising caution in public statements that could affect ongoing legal proceedings." "What ongoing legal proceedings?" Maya asked sharply. "Are you anticipating lawsuits because this kind of incident has happened before?" Rodriguez held up his hand. "Dr. Thompson, David is doing his job, but I'm making the decisions here. And my decision is that we're going to handle this with complete transparency." He turned to Captain Morrison. "Captain, I want you to make an announcement to the entire aircraft. Tell the passengers that we're addressing a serious incident involving crew misconduct and that Skyline Airways Chief of Operations is personally handling the situation." Morrison nodded and reached for the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We're continuing to experience a delay while we address a serious incident that occurred in our cabin. Mr. Michael Rodriguez, Chief of Operations for Skyline Airways, is on board and will be addressing the situation directly. We appreciate your patience." Through the galley curtain, Maya could hear the murmur of passenger conversations growing louder. People were clearly speculating about what could be serious enough to bring airline executives onto the aircraft before departure. Rodriguez turned back to Maya. "Dr. Thompson, I want to make this right, but I also need to understand your intentions. Are you planning to file a formal complaint with the FAA?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Mr. Rodriguez, that depends entirely on how this situation is resolved and what steps you take to ensure it doesn't happen again. I have the authority to initiate a formal investigation into crew training, passenger treatment protocols, and potential civil rights violations. Whether I exercise that authority depends on whether I believe Skyline Airways is serious about meaningful reform. What would convince you that we're serious? Action, not words. I want to see Ms. Walsh terminated, not just suspended. I want mandatory retraining for your entire cabin crew on both FAA regulations and civil rights compliance. I want a formal apology issued by your CEO. And I want a financial contribution to civil rights organizations that work on transportation discrimination issues." Chen started to object, but Rodriguez cut him off. "Dr. Thompson, those are significant demands. Mr. Rodriguez, your flight attendant destroyed a child's treasured belongings based on fabricated safety violations that appear to have been motivated by racial bias. My demands are proportional to the severity of the incident." Zoe tugged on Maya's sleeve. "Mommy, are all these people here because of my backpack?" Maya knelt down beside her daughter. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes when something unfair happens, it takes a lot of people working together to make it right." "Will they be able to fix my patches?" Rodriguez overheard the question and pulled out his phone. "Zoe, what if I told you that we could not only fix your patches, but we could also help you add new ones from places you haven't been yet?" Zoe's eyes widened slightly. "Like where?" "Well, Skyline Airways flies to over 200 destinations around the world. Maybe we could arrange for you and your mom to visit some new places and collect some new patches for your backpack." Maya felt a mix of emotions at Rodriguez's offer. Part of her appreciated the gesture toward Zoe, but another part recognized it as a classic corporate move. Offer compensation to avoid larger accountability. "Mr. Rodriguez," Maya said carefully, "while I appreciate your offer to Zoe, I hope you understand that this situation requires much more than vacation vouchers to resolve." "Of course," Rodriguez replied. "The offer to Zoe is separate from the larger accountability measures we need to implement. Dr. Thompson, I want to be direct with you. Skyline Airways has had 3 similar incidents in the past 18 months. All involved minority passengers being challenged about their seat assignments or carry-on compliance in ways that appear to have been pretextual." Maya felt her stomach drop. 3 incidents? 3 that resulted in formal complaints. We suspect there may have been others that were never reported. David Chen looked like he wanted to disappear. Rodriguez was essentially confessing to a pattern of discriminatory behavior by his airline's crew members, information that could trigger federal investigations and massive civil liability. "Mr. Rodriguez," Maya said slowly, "are you telling me that Ms. Walsh's behavior today was part of a systemic problem at Skyline Airways?" "I'm telling you that we've identified patterns that suggest inadequate training and insufficient oversight of crew-passenger interactions, particularly involving minority passengers in premium cabin service." Maya stood up, her full authority as a federal inspector now clearly visible in her posture and demeanor. "Mr. Rodriguez, what you've just described constitutes potential violations of federal civil rights laws, FAA passenger protection regulations, and possibly criminal civil rights statutes. This is no longer a customer service issue, this is a federal matter." The galley fell silent except for the ambient noise of the aircraft's environmental systems. Rodriguez had just transformed a single incident into an admission of institutional discrimination, and everyone present understood the implications. "Dr. Thompson," Rodriguez said quietly, "I didn't have to tell you about the other incidents. I chose to because I believe transparency is the only path to real reform. Skyline Airways wants to be better than we've been." "Mr. Rodriguez, transparency after the fact doesn't excuse systemic violations, but it does create an opportunity for meaningful change." Maya paused, weighing her next words carefully. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to conduct an informal assessment of your airline's policies and training programs. If I find evidence of institutional bias or inadequate civil rights training, I will recommend a formal FAA investigation. If I find that you're genuinely committed to reform and willing to implement comprehensive changes, I may be willing to work with you on a path forward that serves both justice and prevention." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "What would such an assessment involve?" "Full access to your training materials, incident reports, crew schedules, and passenger complaint records for the past 3 years. Interviews with crew members, supervisors, and passengers who filed complaints. And implementation of new training programs developed in consultation with civil rights experts." "Dr. Thompson," Chen interjected, "you're essentially asking us to open our entire operation to federal scrutiny." "Mr. Chen, your operation is already subject to federal scrutiny. I'm offering you a chance to cooperate proactively rather than reactively." Rodriguez looked at Chen, then back at Maya. "Dr. Thompson, I accept your terms. We'll provide full cooperation with your assessment." "Mr. Rodriguez, I want that commitment in writing, signed by your CEO and delivered to my office within 48 hours. You'll have it." Maya turned to Captain Morrison. "Captain, I want you to understand something. This aircraft and its crew are now part of an ongoing federal assessment. Every interaction with passengers from this point forward will be scrutinized for compliance with civil rights and safety regulations." Morrison nodded gravely. "Understood, Dr. Thompson." Rodriguez stood up and addressed the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to address this situation publicly now. Dr. Thompson, I want you to be present when I make the announcement to the passengers. Your presence will lend credibility to our commitment to accountability." As they prepared to address the cabin, Maya felt a sense of transformation that went beyond her own situation. What had started as a family vacation was becoming a catalyst for institutional change that could affect thousands of future passengers. "Zoe," Maya said, taking her daughter's hand, "we're going to go talk to all the passengers now. Some of them saw what happened to your backpack, and we're going to make sure they understand that it wasn't your fault." "Will they believe us?" Zoe asked. "Baby, they're going to have to believe us, because we're going to tell them the truth, and the truth is powerful." Rodriguez pulled back the galley curtain and stepped into the first-class cabin. The entire aircraft had gone silent, with passengers straining to hear what would happen next. He took the intercom handset and began to speak, his voice carrying clearly throughout the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Rodriguez, Chief of Operations for Skyline Airways. I am addressing you personally because a serious incident occurred on this aircraft that requires immediate attention and accountability." Maya watched the faces of the passengers as Rodriguez continued. Some looked curious, others concerned, and a few appeared to recognize that they were witnessing something unprecedented in commercial aviation. "Earlier this morning, one of our flight attendants engaged in behavior that was completely unacceptable and contrary to both our company values and federal regulations. A 12-year-old passenger was subjected to harassment and had her personal belongings destroyed based on fabricated safety violations." The cabin remained silent, but Maya could see passengers exchanging glances and reaching for their phones. This was about to become very public, very quickly. Rodriguez continued, "The flight attendant responsible has been immediately suspended and will be terminated from employment with Skyline Airways. But more importantly, we've discovered that this incident is part of a pattern that indicates systemic problems with our training and oversight." Maya stepped forward slightly, making herself visible to the passengers as Rodriguez spoke. She wanted them to see that this wasn't just corporate damage control, but accountability demanded by federal authority. Dr. Maya Thompson, who is a Federal Aviation Administration safety inspector and the mother of the child who was mistreated, will be conducting a comprehensive assessment of our policies and training programs. Skyline Airways is committed to complete transparency and meaningful reform. The announcement continued for several more minutes, with Rodriguez outlining specific steps the airline would take immediately. But Maya was already thinking ahead to the investigations that would follow, the policy changes that would be implemented, and the message that would be sent to the entire aviation industry. What had started with a kicked backpack was about grounding planes, transforming training programs, and ensuring that no other child would have to ask their parents if they had done something wrong simply for existing in a space where others thought they didn't belong. 48 hours after Flight 892 was finally cleared for departure, Maya Thompson sat in her downtown Chicago office, surrounded by boxes of documents that painted a disturbing picture of institutional discrimination at Skyline Airways. True to his word, Rodriguez had delivered a signed commitment letter from CEO Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Rebecca, along with unrestricted access to 3 years of company records that most airlines would consider highly confidential. Maya's assistant, Janet Reeves, knocked on the doorframe. "Dr. Thompson, you have the Skyline Airways crew supervisor on line 2, and 3 more whistleblowers have called this morning wanting to speak with you confidentially." Maya looked up from a spreadsheet that showed passenger complaint patterns across Skyline's route network. The data was damning in its consistency. "Transfer the supervisor to my secure line and schedule the whistleblowers for tomorrow. Make sure they understand that all communications are protected under federal whistleblower statutes." The investigation had taken on a life of its own within hours of Maya's return to Chicago. Word had spread quickly through aviation industry networks that the FAA was conducting a comprehensive review of passenger treatment protocols at a major carrier. What had started as an informal assessment was rapidly evolving into something much larger and more consequential. Maya picked up the secure line. "Dr. Thompson speaking." "Dr. Thompson, this is Sarah Martinez, crew supervisor for Skyline's Western region. I need to talk to someone about what's been happening in our training programs." Maya pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Ms. Martinez, before we continue, I want you to understand that this conversation is being documented as part of an official FAA review. You have full whistleblower protection under federal law. Do you wish to proceed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Dr. Thompson, I've been with Skyline for 12 years, and what happened to your daughter isn't isolated. We've had crew members specifically trained to watch for what management calls, quote, upgrade irregularities." Maya's pen stopped moving. "Can you explain what that means?" "It means flight attendants are taught to be suspicious when certain passengers are seated in premium cabins. We're told to look for signs that they might not belong there. Things like inappropriate clothing, unfamiliarity with first-class service, or difficulty following crew instructions." "Ms. Martinez, are you telling me that crew members are trained to profile passengers based on subjective assessments of whether they belong in premium seating?" "Not officially, Dr. Thompson, but in practice, yes. And the passengers who get challenged are almost always minorities. I've seen it happen dozens of times." Maya felt her jaw tighten. "Do you have documentation of these training sessions?" "I have training manuals, email correspondence, and recorded sessions going back 2 years." "Dr. Thompson, I kept everything because I knew this was wrong, but I didn't know who to report it to without risking my job." "Ms. Martinez, you're going to be my primary witness. I need you to compile everything you have and send it to my office through encrypted channels. And I need names of other crew members who can corroborate your testimony." After ending the call, Maya stared at the wall of her office, trying to process the implications of what she'd just heard. This wasn't just about inadequate training or individual bias. This was about systematic profiling that appeared to be embedded in company policy. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Dr. Patricia Chen, her regional administrator. "Maya, I just got off a call with the Department of Transportation. They're asking questions about your assessment of Skyline Airways. How serious is this?" "Patricia, it's more serious than we initially thought. I'm uncovering evidence of systematic passenger profiling that may violate federal civil rights laws. This could trigger DOT Civil Rights Office involvement and possibly Justice Department attention." There was a pause on the line. "Maya, are you saying this could become a criminal investigation?" "I'm saying that the evidence suggests institutional policies designed to exclude certain passengers from services they paid for based on racial and ethnic profiling. That's exactly the kind of conduct that can trigger federal civil rights prosecutions." "Jesus, Maya, how did a carry-on bag incident become this?" "Because it was never really about the carry-on bag, Patricia. It was about a flight attendant who felt comfortable targeting a black child because she'd been trained to view certain passengers as inherently suspicious." Maya spent the rest of the morning reviewing incident reports that showed a clear pattern across Skyline's operation. Passengers with names that suggested African American, Latino, or Middle Eastern heritage were challenged about seat assignments at rates that defied statistical probability. Premium cabin passengers were subjected to additional verification processes that seemed to correlate strongly with racial and ethnic markers. But the most damning evidence came from internal communications that Sarah Martinez had forwarded. Email chains between managers discussing cabin demographics and passenger profile management. Training materials that included coded language about identifying inconsistent passenger behavior. Performance evaluations that praised crew members for maintaining cabin standards and, quote, ensuring appropriate passenger placement. Janet knocked again. Dr. Thompson, you have a call from Congressman Marcus Williams' office. His transportation committee wants a briefing on your findings. Maya looked at her calendar. Congressional attention meant this investigation was about to become very public, very quickly. Schedule it for Friday. And Janet, I want you to reach out to the Civil Rights Division at DOJ. We may need their expertise. That afternoon, Maya received a call that changed everything. Dr. Thompson, this is Amanda Foster. I'm a data analyst at the Transportation Security Administration. I've been following news reports about your investigation, and I think I have information you need to see. Maya put down her coffee. What kind of information, Ms. Foster? Cross-referencing passenger screening data with airline complaint records. Dr. Thompson, the pattern you're seeing at Skyline Airways exists across multiple carriers. This isn't just one airline's problem. Maya felt the investigation expanding beyond anything she'd imagined. Ms. Foster, are you saying that systematic passenger profiling is industry-wide? I'm saying that the data suggests coordinated policies across major carriers that result in discriminatory treatment of minority passengers in premium cabins. Dr. Thompson, I think you've uncovered the tip of a very large iceberg. How large? Based on preliminary analysis, potentially affecting hundreds of thousands of passengers annually across the entire commercial aviation industry. Maya sat back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. What had started as one flight attendant's misconduct was revealing systematic discrimination that could reshape the entire airline industry. Her secure line rang. It was Rodriguez from Skyline Airways. Dr. Thompson, I need to tell you something. Since your investigation became public, we've had 17 crew members come forward with information about discriminatory training and passenger profiling. And we've identified 43 additional incidents involving minority passengers that were never properly reported. 43 incidents? Dr. Thompson, I think we've been systematically discriminating against passengers for years without realizing the full scope of it. Our crew members thought they were following company policy, but the policies themselves were discriminatory. Maya pulled out a fresh legal pad. Mr. Rodriguez, I need documentation of all 43 incidents, copies of the discriminatory training materials, and sworn statements from the 17 crew members. And I need them by tomorrow morning. You'll have them tonight. Dr. Thompson, there's something else. We've discovered that some of these policies were developed in coordination with other major carriers through industry trade associations. Maya's pen stopped moving. Other carriers were involved in developing these policies? At least 3 other major airlines. Dr. Thompson, this investigation is going to require grounding procedures for policy review across multiple carriers. After Rodriguez hung up, Maya stared at her phone for a long moment. Grounding procedures meant that aircraft could be temporarily removed from service pending policy reviews. If 4 major airlines had coordinated discriminatory policies, the investigation could potentially ground hundreds of aircraft, while new training and oversight protocols were implemented. She called Patricia Chen immediately. Patricia, we have a problem. The Skyline investigation has revealed coordinated discriminatory policies across multiple major carriers. We're looking at industry-wide systematic violation of civil rights laws. Maya, are you recommending fleet groundings? I'm recommending immediate suspension of premium cabin service protocols pending comprehensive policy review. Patricia, if we don't act decisively, we're complicit in ongoing civil rights violations. How many aircraft are we talking about? Maya looked at her notes from the conversation with Rodriguez. Based on preliminary information, potentially 200 aircraft across 4 carriers until new training and oversight protocols can be implemented. There was a long silence. Maya, grounding 200 aircraft would be the largest civil rights action in aviation history. Patricia, systematic discrimination against minority passengers would be the largest civil rights violation in aviation history. We don't have a choice. That evening, Maya sat in her kitchen with Zoe, helping her daughter work on a school report about their vacation to Chicago. Zoe had chosen to write about how one person speaking up could change entire systems. Mommy, did all those planes really get grounded because of my backpack? Maya looked at her daughter's earnest face. Baby, those planes are being grounded because airlines forgot that their job is to treat all passengers fairly, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Will they remember now? They're going to have to remember, sweetheart. Because when people don't do the right thing on their own, sometimes other people have to help them remember. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Chen. DOT secretary wants an emergency briefing tomorrow, congressional hearing scheduled for next week. This is going to be bigger than we thought. As Maya tucked Zoe into bed that night, her daughter looked up at her with sleepy eyes. Mommy, are you famous now? Maya smiled and kissed Zoe's forehead. No, baby, I'm just doing my job. But sometimes doing your job the right way makes a big difference. Will other kids not have their backpacks kicked anymore? That's what we're working on, sweetheart. That's exactly what we're working on. The next morning, Maya arrived at her office to find reporters camped outside the federal building and her voicemail full of interview requests from national news outlets. Janet had arranged the calls in order of priority: CNN, NBC, The Washington Post, and 3 congressional offices. But the call that mattered most came at 9 a.m. sharp. Dr. Thompson, this is Secretary of Transportation Robert Martinez. I understand you've uncovered evidence of systematic civil rights violations in commercial aviation. Yes, Mr. Secretary. Evidence suggests coordinated discriminatory policies across multiple major carriers that have resulted in thousands of incidents involving minority passengers. Dr. Thompson, I'm authorizing you to expand this investigation with full departmental support. I want a comprehensive review of passenger treatment protocols across the entire commercial aviation industry. Maya looked out her office window at the reporters below. Mr. Secretary, such an investigation could result in significant operational impacts across multiple carriers. Dr. Thompson, civil rights compliance is not optional. If carriers cannot demonstrate non-discriminatory policies and training, they will face appropriate regulatory action up to and including fleet groundings. As Maya hung up the phone, she realized that Zoe's kicked backpack had become the catalyst for the most comprehensive civil rights investigation in aviation history. Within hours, the FAA would announce operational restrictions that would affect hundreds of aircraft and potentially millions of passengers. But more importantly, it would send a message that discrimination in any form would not be tolerated in the skies above America. Janet knocked on her door. Dr. Thompson, Skyline Airways is calling. They want to know if the afternoon flights are cleared for departure. Maya looked at the stack of evidence on her desk, then at the photo of Zoe she kept beside her computer. Janet, tell them to check with operations. As of this afternoon, no carrier with pending civil rights investigations will be cleared for premium cabin service until they can demonstrate compliance with non-discrimination protocols. The investigation had moved beyond one airline, beyond one incident, beyond one child's damaged backpack. It had become a reckoning for an entire industry that had forgotten that the sky belonged to everyone. 3 weeks after the first aircraft groundings were announced, Maya Thompson found herself standing before a packed auditorium at Georgetown University Law School, delivering a keynote address that would fundamentally reshape how America thought about civil rights in transportation. The audience included federal judges, civil rights attorneys, airline executives, and congressional staffers, all gathered to understand how one incident had triggered the most comprehensive aviation industry reform in decades. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just transformed an entire industry. When my daughter Zoe and I boarded Flight 892 3 weeks ago, we thought we were going on vacation. We had no idea we were about to expose a systematic network of discrimination that had been operating in plain sight for years. The auditorium was silent, except for the occasional flash of camera equipment. Maya's investigation had become front-page news across the country, and her Georgetown address was being live-streamed to law schools, civil rights organizations, and aviation industry groups worldwide. What we discovered, Maya continued, wasn't just one rogue flight attendant or one airline's training failure. We uncovered evidence that 4 major carriers had coordinated through industry associations to develop passenger screening protocols that systematically targeted minority passengers for additional scrutiny, challenges to their seating assignments, and harassment designed to discourage them from purchasing premium cabin tickets. In the 3 weeks since the investigation began, Maya had become the face of aviation civil rights reform. Her methodical approach to documenting discrimination had earned respect from federal officials, airline executives, and civil rights leaders, who recognized that her work represented a new model for addressing institutional bias. But the personal cost had been significant. Maya's Chicago apartment had been under media surveillance for weeks, Zoe's school had implemented additional security measures after online threats from people who blamed Maya for airline industry disruptions. The family had been forced to relocate temporarily to a secure location while the investigation continued. Despite the challenges, Maya had refused to scale back her work. If anything, the threats had reinforced her determination to see the investigation through to meaningful reform rather than cosmetic changes. The grounding of 217 aircraft across 4 major carriers, Maya told the Georgetown audience, wasn't punishment for past discrimination. It was to prevent ongoing discrimination. Every day those aircraft remained in service with discriminatory protocols in place, more passengers were being targeted for harassment based on their race, ethnicity, or perceived socioeconomic status. The groundings had created chaos across the aviation industry. Thousands of flights have been canceled or delayed, while airlines scrambled to implement new training programs and passenger treatment protocols. The economic impact was estimated at over $800 million in the first week alone, making it one of the most expensive regulatory actions in FAA history. But the groundings had also sent an unmistakable message to the industry. Civil rights compliance was not optional, and systematic discrimination would result in immediate operational consequences. Maya's phone had been ringing constantly with calls from airlines, civil rights organizations, and government agencies seeking her expertise in developing new training programs and oversight protocols. She had become, almost overnight, the nation's leading expert on aviation civil rights enforcement. Dr. Thompson, came a question from the audience. Some critics argue that your investigation has unfairly targeted the airline industry and created unnecessary economic hardship. How do you respond to those concerns? Maya paused, considering her response carefully. I would ask those critics to consider the economic hardship experienced by the thousands of passengers who were systematically denied services they had paid for based on discriminatory profiling. I would ask them to consider the emotional trauma experienced by children like my daughter, who learned that their presence in certain spaces would be questioned and challenged, regardless of their right to be there. She continued, the economic disruption we've seen is temporary and correctable. The civil rights violations we uncovered were systematic and ongoing. Which do you think represents the greater harm to American society? The question and answer session continued for over an hour, with Maya fielding inquiries about implementation timelines, enforcement mechanisms, and the broader implications of her work for other transportation sectors. Her answers demonstrated the depth of knowledge she had acquired about institutional discrimination and the complexity of reforming established systems. After the Georgetown address, Maya drove to Capitol Hill for a closed-door briefing with the House Transportation Committee. The meeting had been scheduled by Congressman Marcus Williams, who was preparing comprehensive aviation civil rights legislation based on Maya's findings. Dr. Thompson, Congressman Williams began as Maya took her seat in the committee's secure briefing room. Your investigation has revealed problems that Congress should have identified and addressed years ago. We need your expertise to ensure that our legislative response is both effective and enforceable. Maya opened her briefing folder, which contained draft language for federal legislation that would mandate annual civil rights audits for all commercial carriers, establish passenger protection protocols, and create whistleblower protections for airline employees who reported discriminatory practices. Collaborator. Congressman Williams, the legislation needs to address 3 critical areas, Maya said. First, mandatory bias training for all customer-facing airline personnel, with standardized curricula developed by civil rights experts. Second, independent monitoring of passenger treatment protocols, with random audits conducted by federal investigators. Third, swift enforcement mechanisms that allow for immediate operational restrictions when discrimination is identified. Committee members took detailed notes as Maya outlined specific recommendations for each area. Her proposal included the creation of a new Federal Aviation Civil Rights Office within the Department of Transportation, with authority to investigate complaints, conduct audits, and impose sanctions ranging from fines to operational restrictions. Dr. Thompson asked Congresswoman Sarah Chin, what resistance are you encountering from the airline industry? Maya considered the question carefully. Congresswoman, the resistance varies by carrier. Some airlines, like Skyline Airways, have embraced comprehensive reform and are working proactively to eliminate discriminatory practices. Others are seeking minimal compliance that allows them to resume normal operations without addressing underlying cultural problems. And how do you distinguish between genuine reform and cosmetic changes? Results, Congresswoman. Airlines that are serious about reform show measurable changes in complaint patterns, passenger demographics in premium cabins, and crew behavior during random monitoring. Airlines that are engaging in cosmetic compliance show improved documentation while maintaining discriminatory practices. The congressional briefing lasted 3 hours, with committee members asking detailed questions about implementation costs, industry resistance, and enforcement mechanisms. Maya's responses demonstrated not only her technical expertise, but also her understanding of the political complexities involved in reforming an industry with significant economic and political influence. Following the Capitol Hill briefing, Maya returned to her hotel to find a stack of messages from journalists, civil rights organizations, and airline executives. But the call that mattered most was from Zoe's school principal. Dr. Thompson, I wanted to update you on Zoe's situation. She's been receiving letters and drawings from children across the country who have heard about what happened on the airplane. The kids want to support her and thank her for speaking up. Maya felt tears welling in her eyes. How is Zoe handling all the attention? She's remarkable, Dr. Thompson. Yesterday she told her class that sometimes grown-ups need children to remind them how to be fair to each other. She's become something of a leader among her peers. That evening, Maya video called with Zoe, who was staying with her aunt in Atlanta while Maya completed her congressional testimony. Mommy, a girl from Oregon sent me a new patch for my backpack. It says courage on it. She said it's because I was brave when the mean lady was being unfair. Maya smiled through her exhaustion. What do you think about that, baby? I think maybe my backpack getting kicked was supposed to happen so that other kids won't get their things kicked anymore. The wisdom in Zoe's response reminded Maya why she had pushed the investigation beyond simple resolution of their personal incident. This was about creating a world where children like Zoe could travel freely without having their presence questioned or their belongings treated with disrespect. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Chen. CNN wants an exclusive interview tomorrow. Washington Post preparing major investigative series. This story has legs. The media attention had been both beneficial and overwhelming. Maya's investigation had gained national prominence, which helped ensure that airline industry reform would remain a priority for Congress and federal agencies. But the constant spotlight had also made it difficult for Maya to maintain the methodical, evidence-based approach that had made her investigation credible. The next morning, Maya sat across from CNN anchor Anderson Cooper in the network's Washington bureau, preparing for what would become one of the most watched interviews of the year. Dr. Thompson, Cooper began, 3 weeks ago, you were an unknown federal inspector taking your daughter on vacation. Today, you are leading the largest civil rights investigation in aviation history. How has this transformed your life? Maya considered the question carefully. Anderson, I didn't set out to become a public figure or lead a movement. I set out to ensure that what happened to my daughter wouldn't happen to other children. But once we began investigating, it became clear that this was bigger than one incident or one airline. Some people are calling you a hero for standing up to airline discrimination. Others say you've caused unnecessary disruption to air travel. How do you see yourself in this situation? I see myself as a federal inspector doing my job, which is to ensure that commercial aviation operates safely and fairly for all passengers. The disruption we've seen is the natural consequence of an industry that lost sight of its obligation to serve all customers equally. Cooper leaned forward. Dr. Thompson, you've essentially grounded over 200 aircraft and forced 4 major airlines to completely restructure their passenger service protocols. Don't you think that's an extreme response to what started as a relatively minor incident? Maya felt her professional composure strengthen. Anderson, systematic discrimination is never minor. When an airline trains its crew to target passengers for harassment based on racial profiling, that's not a customer service issue. That's a civil rights violation that affects thousands of passengers annually. The interview continued for 30 minutes, with Cooper asking pointed questions about implementation costs, industry resistance, and the precedent Maya's investigation might set for other sectors. Maya's responses were measured and fact-based, reinforcing her credibility as a serious reformer rather than a publicity-seeking activist. After the CNN interview, Maya met with representatives from the NAACP, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the ACLU, who had formed a coalition to support her investigation and ensure that reforms were implemented comprehensively. B. Dr. Thompson said NAACP Legal Defense Fund Director Marcus Johnson, "Your work has opened doors for civil rights enforcement that we've been trying to open for decades. We want to ensure that this momentum leads to lasting change rather than temporary compliance." Maya nodded. "Mr. Johnson, lasting change requires ongoing oversight and enforcement. The legislation we're proposing includes annual audits, random monitoring, and swift sanctions for non-compliance. But it also requires civil rights organizations to maintain pressure for implementation." The coalition meeting lasted 2 hours, with representatives discussing strategies for monitoring airline compliance, supporting passengers who filed complaints, and ensuring that federal agencies maintained enforcement priorities beyond the immediate crisis. As Maya prepared to return to Chicago that evening, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since boarding Flight 892. She had become an accidental civil rights leader, forced to navigate media attention, political pressure, and industry resistance while maintaining her commitment to evidence-based reform. But she had also seen the power of individual action to create institutional change. One incident, properly investigated and courageously pursued, had revealed systematic discrimination and triggered reforms that would affect millions of passengers for years to come. Maya's phone rang as her flight boarded. It was Rodriguez from Skyline Airways. "Dr. Thompson, I wanted to update you on our progress. We've completed retraining for our entire cabin crew staff, implemented new passenger advocacy protocols, and hired an independent civil rights monitor to audit our operations quarterly. Mr. Rodriguez, I appreciate the updates, but the real test will be measurable changes in passenger treatment and complaint patterns." "Dr. Thompson, I understand. But I also wanted to thank you. Your investigation forced us to confront problems we should have addressed years ago. We're a better airline because of your courage." As Maya's flight took off for Chicago, she looked down at the lights of Washington, D.C. and thought about Zoe, who was probably finishing her homework and preparing for bed. Tomorrow, Maya would return to her daughter and begin the next phase of their life together, a life that had been irrevocably changed by one flight attendant's decision to kick a child's backpack. But it had also become a life dedicated to ensuring that discrimination would never again be tolerated in the skies above America. 2 years after Flight 892, Maya Thompson stood in the gleaming headquarters of the newly established Federal Aviation Civil Rights Office in Washington, D.C., watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as aircraft traced paths across the autumn sky. Each plane represented thousands of passengers who now traveled under protections that hadn't existed before Zoe's backpack was kicked down an airplane aisle. As the newly appointed Director of Aviation Civil Rights, Maya had overseen the most comprehensive transformation of passenger protection protocols in commercial aviation history. The office she now led employed 347 investigators, civil rights attorneys, and policy specialists working across 12 regional centers to ensure that discrimination would never again be institutionalized in American skies. Director Thompson, her assistant Kevin Martinez, announced over the intercom, "The Secretary of Transportation is here for the 2-year anniversary briefing." Maya straightened her blazer and walked to the conference room, where Secretary Robert Martinez waited with congressional leadership, airline executives, and civil rights advocates who had gathered to assess the lasting impact of the reforms triggered by a single incident on a Chicago to Atlanta flight. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, addressing the assembled group that included faces she now recognized as allies, former adversaries, and partners in ongoing reform, "today marks the 2nd anniversary of the Federal Aviation Civil Rights Act, and I'm pleased to report that the changes we've implemented have fundamentally transformed how commercial aviation serves all passengers." She gestured to a wall-mounted display showing statistics that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. Passenger discrimination complaints have decreased by 87% across all major carriers. Minority passenger representation in premium cabins has increased by 34%. Most importantly, we've established a sustainable framework for ongoing monitoring and enforcement that ensures these improvements will continue. Secretary Martinez nodded approvingly. "Director Thompson, can you walk us through the specific mechanisms that have made this transformation possible?" Maya moved to the presentation screen, displaying data that represented hundreds of thousands of passenger interactions now governed by evidence-based protocols rather than subjective bias. "The foundation of our success has been three-pronged. Mandatory civil rights training for all customer-facing airline personnel, independent monitoring through random audits and passenger feedback systems, and swift enforcement mechanisms that create real consequences for discriminatory behavior. She clicked to the next slide, showing before and after comparisons that starkly illustrated the scope of change. Prior to our reforms, minority passengers were 340% more likely to be challenged about premium cabin seating, 280% more likely to face additional verification procedures, and 290% more likely to experience what airlines euphemistically called service inconsistencies. Today, those disparities have been reduced to statistically insignificant levels. Congressman Marcus Williams leaned forward. Director Thompson, what's been the most significant challenge in implementing these reforms? Maya considered the question carefully, thinking about the resistance, setbacks, and ongoing vigilance required to maintain progress. Congressman, the biggest challenge has been changing institutional culture rather than just policies. It's relatively easy to rewrite training manuals and create new procedures. It's much harder to transform mindsets that have operated on unconscious bias for decades. She clicked to a case study slide. For example, we discovered that even after comprehensive retraining, some crew members continued to apply stricter standards to minority passengers, not out of conscious prejudice, but because they had internalized differential treatment as normal professional behavior. Addressing that required ongoing monitoring, feedback, and additional training focused on recognizing unconscious bias. Michael Rodriguez, who had remained as Skyline Airways Chief of Operations and become a vocal advocate for industry reform, spoke from the audience. Director Thompson, from an airline perspective, I can confirm that the cultural transformation has been the most challenging aspect, but also the most rewarding. Our customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers have improved by 45%, and our overall service quality has improved as well. Maya smiled at Rodriguez, remembering their tense first meeting in the aircraft galley. Mr. Rodriguez has become one of our strongest industry partners, demonstrating that airlines can view civil rights compliance not as a burden, but as an opportunity to improve service for all passengers. The briefing continued with detailed discussions of enforcement mechanisms, training protocols, and ongoing challenges. But Maya's mind occasionally drifted to the personal journey that had brought her to this moment. Zoe, now 14, had become something of a celebrity in civil rights circles. Her purple backpack, carefully repaired and adorned with new patches from their travels to speak at conferences and universities, had been displayed at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture as part of an exhibit on transportation civil rights. More importantly, Zoe had developed into a thoughtful advocate for fairness and justice, speaking to youth groups about the power of individual courage to create systemic change. She had recently been accepted to a specialized STEM program focused on aerospace engineering, with dreams of designing aircraft that would serve passengers more fairly and efficiently. Director Thompson, came a question from the audience: what lessons from your aviation work are being applied to other transportation sectors? Maya clicked to a new section of her presentation. The Aviation Civil Rights Act has become a model for reform in other areas. The Department of Transportation has implemented similar monitoring and enforcement mechanisms for passenger rail, intercity bus transportation, and ride-sharing services. We've discovered that discriminatory practices that seemed isolated to aviation were actually present across multiple transportation sectors. She displayed statistics showing discrimination patterns that had been identified and addressed in bus terminals, train stations, and ride-sharing algorithms. The investigative techniques we developed for aviation have revealed systematic bias in transportation that most passengers experienced but few could prove. We now have federal oversight and enforcement mechanisms that ensure equal treatment across all forms of commercial transportation. The presentation concluded with Maya's most significant announcement. Today, I'm pleased to announce the expansion of our office's mandate to include international aviation partnerships. We're working with civil aviation authorities in 12 countries to establish global standards for passenger civil rights protection. Secretary Martinez stood to address the group. Director Thompson's work has demonstrated that civil rights enforcement isn't just morally necessary, it's operationally beneficial. Airlines that have embraced comprehensive reform report improved customer satisfaction, reduced liability, and enhanced reputation among all passenger demographics. As the formal briefing concluded, Maya found herself in smaller conversations with participants who had become colleagues and partners over the past 2 years. The coalition of civil rights organizations had evolved into a sophisticated monitoring network that provided ongoing oversight of airline compliance. Congressional leadership had maintained bipartisan support for enforcement funding and legislative updates. But the conversation that mattered most came from an unexpected source. Dr. Thompson said a young woman who approached her as the meeting disbanded, "I'm Jessica Walsh, Rebecca Walsh's daughter." Maya turned, surprised by the introduction. Rebecca Walsh, the flight attendant whose actions had triggered everything, had been terminated from Skyline Airways and had largely disappeared from public view. "I wanted to thank you," Jessica continued. "What happened to your daughter was wrong, and my mother's behavior was inexcusable. But the way you handled the situation, focusing on systemic change rather than personal vengeance, that taught me something important about justice." Maya studied the young woman's face, seeing sincerity and pain. "Jessica, I appreciate you saying that. How is your mother doing?" "She's struggled with what happened, but she's also learned from it. She's been working with a civil rights organization, helping to train customer service representatives about unconscious bias. She wanted me to tell you that she's grateful you chose reform over retribution." The conversation reminded Maya that even the most difficult situations could lead to growth and understanding for all parties involved. Rebecca Walsh's discriminatory behavior had been unacceptable, but her daughter's outreach suggested that the broader message about fairness and justice had reached even those most directly affected by the consequences. That evening, Maya returned to her Chicago apartment, where Zoe was finishing homework at the kitchen table. The purple backpack sat beside her chair, now bearing patches from every state they'd visited during Maya's speaking engagements and conference presentations. "How was the anniversary meeting, Mom?" Zoe asked, looking up from her aerospace engineering textbook. "It was good, baby. We've made real progress, and we're going to keep making progress." Zoe held up a patch she'd been working on, a custom design showing an airplane with the words "Fair Skies for All" embroidered around it. "I made this for the backpack. I figured it needed a patch that represents what we learned." Maya felt tears welling in her eyes as she looked at her daughter's creation. "It's perfect, Zoe. Absolutely perfect." As they sat together working on their respective projects, Maya reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that morning in Chicago when they'd simply wanted to go on vacation. The investigation that followed had consumed 2 years of their lives, but it had also created lasting change that would benefit millions of passengers for generations to come. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Chen, her former supervisor, who now served as deputy administrator of the FAA. "Saw the anniversary coverage on the news. Proud of how far we've come. Lunch next week to discuss international expansion?" Maya texted back, "Absolutely, this work is far from finished." And that was the truth Maya had learned over the past 2 years. Real civil rights progress wasn't achieved through single victories or landmark moments. It required ongoing vigilance, continuous monitoring, and sustained commitment to ensuring that hard-won protections weren't eroded by complacency or changing political priorities. The Federal Aviation Civil Rights Office had become a permanent fixture in federal transportation oversight, with bipartisan congressional support and sustainable funding that ensured its work would continue regardless of political changes. But Maya knew that the office's effectiveness depended on public awareness and ongoing pressure from civil rights organizations and affected communities. 6 months later, Maya received a letter that encapsulated the lasting impact of their work. "Dear Dr. Thompson," it read, "My name is Carlos Rodriguez, no relation to Michael Rodriguez from Skyline Airways. And I'm writing to thank you for creating a world where my family can travel without fear of discrimination. Last month, my wife and I flew first class to our anniversary destination, and for the first time in our 20 years of marriage, we weren't questioned about our seats, challenged about our boarding passes, or made to feel like we didn't belong. We know that comfort exists because of your daughter's courage and your commitment to justice. Our 8-year-old son will grow up in a world where his presence in premium cabins is normal rather than suspicious, and that's a gift beyond measure." Maya kept the letter in her desk drawer, alongside dozens of similar messages from passengers who had experienced the difference that systematic reform could make. Each letter reminded her that their work had created tangible improvements in the daily lives of real people, not just abstract policy changes. As Maya prepared for another international conference on transportation civil rights, she looked at a photo on her desk showing her and Zoe standing beside a display of the purple backpack at the Smithsonian. Zoe was grinning broadly, pointing to the placard that read, "This backpack belonged to Zoe Thompson, whose experience on Flight 892 triggered the most comprehensive civil rights reform in aviation history." But the photo Maya treasured most was smaller and less formal. Zoe, asleep on an airplane, her head resting peacefully against the window, her backpack securely positioned under the seat in front of her. No flight attendant had questioned its placement. No one had challenged their right to be there. No one had made her daughter feel unwelcome in a space she had every right to occupy. That photo represented the ultimate success of their work, a world where children like Zoe could travel freely and safely without having to explain their presence or defend their right to equal treatment. Maya's assistant knocked on her office door. "Director Thompson, the morning briefing is ready, and you have interviews with 3 international aviation authorities this afternoon about implementing our civil rights protocols in their countries." Maya gathered her materials and walked toward another day of work that had grown far beyond what she could have imagined when Zoe's backpack was kicked down an airplane aisle. But she carried with her the knowledge that every meeting, every policy change, and every enforcement action created a fairer and more just transportation system for all passengers. The legacy of Flight 892 wasn't just about one family's experience or one airline's transformation. It was about proving that individual courage, sustained effort, and systematic reform could create lasting change that protected the rights and dignity of millions of people. And in the end, that was worth every challenge they had faced and every sacrifice they had made along the way. As Maya began her morning briefing, reviewing cases from across the country where her office's investigators were ensuring equal treatment for all passengers, she felt the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. Somewhere in the skies above America, families were traveling together without fear of discrimination, children were experiencing the wonder of flight without shame or exclusion, and passengers of all backgrounds were being treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. That was the true measure of their success. Not the policies they had written or the offices they had established, but the peaceful travel experiences of countless passengers who would never know their names but whose journeys were made safer and fairer because 2 people had refused to accept discrimination as normal. Maya smiled as she began another day of work that ensured the skies above America truly belonged to everyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.